Hello and welcome to How to Be a Better DM, a part of Session Zero Studios. My name is Tanner Wayland, and I'm going to help you learn how to be the best DM you can be while also making it manageable, fun, and in regards to today's topic, uh, consistent. Because that's kind of a hard thing with D&D in general, is just keeping up with the gaming, right? Meeting consistently, going through a campaign, keeping a party together. That's a hard thing. And we've all been there. You've had a great run with all your players. It's been month after month and maybe even week after week. You've been able to meet without any significant delays or gaps. And then all of a sudden, it's hard to meet. You don't know why. Maybe, when you do discuss meeting up again, people just have a hard time nailing down a date, or some people don't respond, or whatever else. And suddenly you start worrying, is this campaign, does it not have much longer to live, so to speak? I call this losing momentum. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it life. You can call it D&D, because it's a big part of D&D is this on again, off again kind of relationship we have with our individual D&D groups. But there always comes a time when you notice that whether it's you or your player, there isn't as much commitment to getting together. And it's the way that a lot of D&D campaigns end. So today I wanted to talk about this, specifically the causes for it, and also how you resolve those causes or how you answer them, and how you get beyond them to regain your momentum. So first off, a big one, and this one's kind of hard to push against, is life changes, right? Maybe one of your players just moved further away, so it's harder to come back to your place where you're holding the campaign. Or maybe someone got children, and at least when the baby is first born, that kind of takes them out completely, understandably. But then maybe they also have a hard time getting back in because now they have an extra child, or a child in general if they didn't before. Further, there's a lot of other life events that are just momentary, but it's like a few months momentary, right? Like someone lost a job and they're really stressed about that and they're really focusing on that. Or, on the opposite end, someone's getting married. Great thing. Not super conducive if they're very involved in the planning to, meeting up and also to devoting time to that. So how do you resolve this kind of life change leading to lack of momentum? I mean, first off, I just want to preface this for all of these by saying sometimes it's okay to take a break. If someone's going through something, maybe they have a health crisis, or they're like, hey, just right now I've got other priorities because, my family or whatever else. It's okay to take a break. And in fact, it's healthy for your enjoyment of D&D. Like fun activities, sometimes they lose their novelty and excitement when it begins to feel more like a scheduled task or appointment rather than kind of a novel getting together of friends. So I'm not saying this happens to everyone, but like if this is happening to you just in general, consider the benefits of a break and being like, hey, we don't have to meet for another month or two. But I would like to meet after that. And you can set a date so that a break doesn't become an end, but it's just a break by saying, hey, let's have a break. It'll be this time period. Let's meet up this time at this date. And guess what? Even if the date isn't perfect, so long as you set the date and you remember to follow up on it as you get closer, then you're golden, right? Because then that will remind players and you'll be able to work something out like for an actual time. It's just about setting the expectation of meeting up again and kind of having a time frame for it. But another reason why I kind of advocate taking a break if you're losing momentum and like treating it like a break rather than an end is that if you kind of set up your gaming or your campaigns like this, where there's mini arcs or mini campaigns within the overarching story, then it basically keeps the momentum going. It means that you don't get burned out as often. It means that, you guys all have a break, because if you want to have a good story, meeting often is important. but also it can become a little bit of a strain. So having breaks, the occasional break, it's healthy, it's good. So long as you also, I mean, if you want to keep playing, set a goal or a date to meet up again. But anyway, that was kind of a preface. Getting back to specifically life changes, if you don't do, an actual taking a break, one way you can resolve this and actually keep meeting is, you try and resolve the specific issue. If it is in the case that I said they moved kind of far away, maybe they or everybody starts doing online tabletop role playing, right? Like it could be Roll20, it could be any number of systems online. There's some great free ones that allow you to still, kind of like a Discord, but with a map and everything, get together and meet. If it's something else like children or a marriage or something like that, what you can do is, find out first if they'd like to keep playing, because sometimes they might initiate a personal break for themselves where they're like, hey, you guys keep meeting, it's not good for me, in which case respect their decision and, let them know that there's always a seat at the table when they're ready for it, right? That way, that you're not leaving anyone behind who would like to join but just feel like, oh, it's too inconvenient. But if they would like to join, and, like I said, it's you can have much faster and frequent sessions if you do online. You can also, you can make it less frequent. Maybe someone has a hard time getting away from their kids, once a week, but maybe they could do once every other week or once a month, right? And if you're like, oh, I kind of want to have one group keep meeting as often, talk it out with a group, see if they still want to, because they might enjoy meeting less frequently. Or you kind of have two separate campaigns, right? When that other player can join, you guys take a break from the main campaign and you do a separate, campaign of one shots, essentially, where you maybe meet a little bit longer than you did before, but they're kind of more one shot, one off adventures. So there's a few ways you can do it. Life changes are hard to combat in terms of losing momentum, but there are ways to do it if you and the person who's going through a life change want it, right? There's other kinds of things that lose momentum that I think are more common, like player burnout or DM burnout. And oftentimes player burnout is like, oh, or same for DMs actually, now that I'm thinking about it. It's like campaign stagnation, where either you or the players are just not feeling like the story is really propelling them forward, or their character feels like an observer slash just like a pawn rather than an actual character whose story is being told. Sometimes that happens when sometimes it's their, I don't want to say their fault. Sometimes a player's character's backstory doesn't integrate into the plot super easily, and so maybe you haven't put too much work into doing that, or it's not super convincing the way that you have, and sometimes that stagnates the campaign and leads to player or DM burnout. Other times it's, maybe the player is straight up just tired of something. Maybe they just don't feel like combat's very fun, and they don't realize that they built their character poorly, or they don't like their character in general. Um, these are easy ways for players to get burned out and just uninterested, and it's because they don't have that tie to the story anymore. So what you can do is you can address those specifically and say, hey, what's up? I've been noticing you're kind of not into it. How do you feel about your character? Oh, you don't feel for them that much? What do you think about a new one? Well, let's start working on a new one. Or they can be like, I kind of like it, but I just feel like uh, the fighting isn't great. And then you can be like, okay, how about this? What do you want to do? Like, do you want to switch classes for this character? We could write in a story, like a plot hook that tells how he switched classes. You could say, oh, your elf uh, isn't fighting as well as you want. You know what? How about you can keep them as, as a warrior, as a fighter, but what you can do is, respect them. I'll allow that. I'll write into the story how you get a mentor, and we can get that figured out, right? Or a ranger or what a wizard or whatever you want, right? You can have them retool their character or just get a new character and find a way to kind of disappear their current character into the background with a story specific reason, of course. And that can help your players feel more tied to the story if they're feeling down. A lot of times, though, you don't even need to change anything about their character. You can just do one of two things. You can find out what they're interested in, whether it's more like interesting story or more fights or more role play, and you can add those things in. Or, and I think this is a really fun challenge if you find that your players kind of are taking everything in stride and I mean, for loss of a better phrase, they've lost their sense of wonder about the campaign. Uh, what you can do is just make it your goal instead of like, hey, I'm going to have this whole story and it's going to have everything. It's going to have great fights, great characters, great whatever. You scrap all of those side goals and your main goal becomes surprising the character. You know, it that is such it simplifies things and maybe it makes for a weird chapter of your story where suddenly they're like, man, yeah, things really changed around then. But if you suddenly are like, hey, things are boring, let's throw a lot of my presuppositions about this story and about the campaign out the window, and I'm going to just start surprising the heck out of them like every session. And then I'll tell you what, they will get interested. They might be a little confused, but they will get interested about what's coming next. Kind of like a horror movie, right? You're just like, oh, what's happening? And then, as much as it shocks you and maybe is displeasing in certain ways, it certainly keeps you on your toes. And so I really recommend that. And that's also a great suggestion for DM burnout, right? Maybe your characters are fine, but you just feel like everything is kind of run of the mill. You've been doing this for a bit. Your campaign's going how you want, but you realize, man, I've been trying so hard to do something specific that I've taken the joy or the surprise or the fluidity out of my campaign. You can fix that by focusing on side goals. Instead of just like getting out a good session and responding to players well, suddenly you're like, hey, my goal is to do that, but I'm also going to secretly be getting them to start a fight night or something, right? And you do everything you can to just make that weird little dream happen. Or you can be like, hey, I'm a little bored of this. I'm going to have them start a restaurant, or oh, I'm going to have them join a pirate's crew. You can have your own separate goals, and I'm not saying in a railroady way, but you can do try and almost creatively put your characters into a very specific way that they never could have seen coming, right? It's kind of the idea of surprising them, but you're surprising them by secretly getting them into a position that they never could have imagined. And that's going to really help you feel more interested. Now, kind of along with that is if you're ever feeling bored or bummed out with the story and you feel like you just don't know what to do next, switch up the genre, make it an entirely different story, or at least for a little bit, right? It's like, oh, the characters were fighting this bad group and then they were getting this relic and then they went to this dungeon, kind of run of the mill things for you. You can be like, you know what? I kind of want a travel journey, like one where they're on a ship and they have to upgrade it and they have to get crew and it becomes a travel log. You can do that at any time. What you just need to do is some hand waving to kind of wrap up, or you just wrap up the current storyline while you're planning this. And then you just thrust your players as if it's the start of a campaign into this new situation. They awake and they're in a jail or something else, right? And then you kind of just set the stage. Don't be afraid to change up how things are if you feel like it's not fun for you anymore as the DM, because it should be fun. Another thing that I think is harder, kind of like life changes. This one is player and DM conflicts, just like interpersonal conflicts around the table. That can be such a huge cause of losing momentum because I mean, we all know this. Anybody who's had friendships or been in relationships, they are complicated things. Communication is hard, and when there's disagreements or conflicts, those don't just get resolved. And especially in D&D, if they don't get resolved, suddenly it's very awkward. And suddenly something that was supposed to be a fun, relaxing time, just there's just tension in the air because two players got in an argument over something. You could tell that the argument went a little bit deeper than it needed to, or the DM, I mean, maybe you accidentally showed favoritism or just PO'd another a player so bad because of a decision you made. Whatever it is, conflicts can happen often, and not everyone just gets over them. So I say that these are tricky because a lot of times some parties would just rather just end rather than than actually resolving these. But if you really want to make it work, what I recommend is practicing communication, talking with that individual, like specifically alone, and being like, hey, apologize for anything that you've had that you may have caused in that situation, any misunderstandings, and see if they accept that. Otherwise, you might have to set boundaries and be like, hey, I understand that my decision to not let you do this thing that I thought was broken really bummed you out. And I apologize because I know this is supposed to mostly be about fun. I just felt that it might cause these issues with other players. However, I want to give you that kind of fun experience. How about this? I've been thinking about it all week, and you can tame a dragon as a pet, but and then you give caveats, and then you kind of essentially start negotiating, but in a way that you're respecting them, they're respecting you, and you're both realizing that, like, hey, this is a game, this is mostly about fun, let's come to an agreement. And so yeah, there's ways to do that. If two players are having arguments, I would talk to them individually as their DM and be like, hey, I noticed this happened, thoughts. Like, do you think this is something that can be resolved? Did you take it super personally? Do you want to resolve this? And be like, because I think that you guys are both great people, and I'm happy to help you resolve this, and to help you understand each other and have more respect going forward. But I want to know if you're willing to try, because if they're not, then it's not going to happen. So yeah, that's kind of the way to go about it. And like I said, it's probably one of the more tricky ones, along with life changes, is interpersonal conflicts. So just treat everyone with respect and be very thoughtful about it. And I think that you can, I mean, same as any relationship, you can patch up things that have gone bad, and you'll probably respect each other a bit more and understand each other's boundaries a bit more going forward. But those are some thoughts on why people lose momentum, or rather, why specifically D&D groups lose momentum, and also how you can build back up that momentum, how you can fix the issue that caused that loss of momentum. And I think it's absolutely worth it, right? I mentioned at the start how like, hey, it's okay to take a break. There's no shame in saying, oh, I'm tired of gaming. Gaming is fun until it's not. That's okay to say. But it's also, as everyone knows, it's hard to start a D&D group and to keep meeting regularly. So if you have a good group, and if you like them enough, and if they like you, treat every break as temporary. Treat any kind of conflict or stagnation as something that can be resolved, and move forward. Because I think the longer you're meeting with a group, the more rich the story becomes. Even if you switch characters and universes and game types, the longer that a group is playing together, you kind of build a rich tapestry of connections, and that adds a lot of depth to the game. And so I would invite you to think to yourself about your current group or even past groups. Think about how they may be losing momentum right now, or how they have if it was a group that stopped meeting. And then think about what you can do to change that, or what you could have done. And hey, if you're in a situation where you don't have a game to play with right now because a group lost momentum, this is your invitation to reach out again and be like, hey, I really like that. We should start a new game. Just start from scratch. If the old campaign didn't pan out well and it's been a while, you don't need to restart it. This is your this is your golden ticket to be like, hey, we acknowledge that things kind of fizzled out, but we had something. Let's meet again. This is your golden ticket. Take it to the bank. Go have a fun campaign, and also change anything that needs to be changed to get the momentum back. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and until next time, let's roll initiative.
Brought to you by Session Zero Studios. For more information, visit sessionzerostudios.com.